Well, hello again. Merle Dimbath here. New York City has for years been a major international city. It's one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in. The housing shortage and the high cost of living space is a long-term condition. And the city's financial budget and deficit are large and getting larger. Geographically, it is also remote and far away from most of the population centers of the world. Why is the United Nations located there? It is far removed from the capitals of many small member states, and the city's high cost is a financial challenge to numerous poor nations. Relocating the UN to a lower cost location would be a major economic benefit to not only most of the member states, but would also contribute significantly to solving New York's housing and financial problems. I'll explain in the following presentation. The United Nations located its permanent headquarters in New York City after World War II because Europe was heavily damaged, and the United States emerged as a stable global power. John D. Rockefeller Jr. donated $8.5 million to provide for the purchase of the current Turtle Bay site along the East River, about 18 acres. The United States provided an interest-free loan of $65 million for the construction of the buildings, and that loan was paid off in 1982. Representatives from 50 countries signed the UN Charter at the San Francisco Conference on June 26, 1945. Poland later signed on October 15, 1945, bringing the total of the original member states to 51. There are currently 193 member countries, literally from all over the world. In fact, most of the world's sovereign nations belong. And to keep this organization going, around 15,890 people work directly with the UN community. This includes roughly 3,000 to 6,000 core administrative UN employees at the Secretariat, along with several thousand diplomats, advisors, and security personnel attached to the various countries. Each member state maintains its own permanent diplomatic mission in New York City, and staff sizes are entirely at the discretion and budget of each individual country. Each member state maintains its own permanent diplomatic mission. Staff sizes range according to the discretion and budget of each individual country. Large superpowers like the United States, China, and Russia routinely maintain delegations of well over 100 persons. The primary centerpiece of the United Nations headquarters in New York City is the 39-story Secretariat building, which has approximately 889,000 square feet of floor space. That's on top of the 18-acre plot which we described earlier. The United Nations operates on an annual budget of about $3.5 billion. This covers the administrative and operating cost of the main UN organizations, including the Secretariat and the General Assembly and human rights programs. It does not include separate 5.1 to 5.4 billion peacekeeping budget, nor donations to agencies like UNICEF. Each member state are billed according to a mandatory fee called assessed contributions, and instead of splitting the bill equally, the UN charges countries based upon a complex mathematical formula, based primarily on the size of the nation, their gross domestic product, and so forth. The largest share is paid by the United States, 22%, which is the maximum to be paid, and the smallest share goes to smaller countries, 0.001%, and right now that's around $35,000 a year. Another major source of funding to the United Nations and its members comes from the city of New York in the form of tax exemption. Neither the UN nor do any of its members pay real estate property taxes to New York City or New York State. This exemption costs the city millions of dollars in tax revenue. If the UN property were stripped of its diplomatic immunity and sold to a private owner, it would probably be classified as a Class 4 commercial property with a tax rate in excess of 10% of its assessed value. High-end Manhattan office buildings typically sell for over $1,000 a square feet. So if you take the 889,000 square feet building, you can easily come up with an appraisal there of approaching $1 billion. If you add the value of the 18-acre campus to the structure, it's not hard to come up with a valuation of $4 to $5 billion for the UN property. Assuming an assessed tax valuation ratio of 45% applied to market value and applying a tax rate in excess of 10%, the foregone taxes would be around $44 million a year that the city of New York is not collecting. Adding the land value of 18 acres, the total tax, if the property were in private hands, could easily exceed $200 million a year. $200 million that the city of New York is not collecting. But wait, there's more. Every member nation of the United Nations is legally exempt from paying property taxes on buildings and property that they use for official diplomatic residences and businesses and to house their diplomatic staff. High-level ambassadors, more permanent representatives live in prestigious multi-million-dollar townhouses or luxury apartments, mainly on the Upper East Side or Midtown East, close to the UN headquarters. Mid- and lower-level staff and most diplomatic attachés and advisors and clerical staff rent apartments throughout the Midtown and Murray Hill and Turtle Bay area. And there's more. Accredited diplomats and eligible mission staff are issued official tax exemption cards by the U.S. Department of State. Presenting this card at the register instantly removes state and local sales taxes on retail items, restaurant meals, electronics, and clothing. The list goes on. High-ranking diplomatic agents have the right to import personal vehicles, furniture, alcohol, tobacco, household goods into the United States completely free of custom duties, tariffs, and federal excise taxes. Packages in large containers shipped to missions are protected by international law and cannot be searched or taxed by U.S. Customs. And finally, and you'll love this, official permanent missions and primary residences of senior diplomats are exempted from local utility taxes. This applies to recurring monthly operational bills, electricity, gas, telephone, and water. I do not have estimates on the amount of taxes that are lost to local governments as a result of these additional non-real estate exemptions, but clearly they could be into the millions of dollars. The UN building of 889,000 square feet could be sold and converted into apartments. This would help ease the housing shortage in New York City. Available information informs me that the average New York apartment is 779 square feet. So if we take the UN building and subtract 20% of the square footage for common purposes, we can see that it would be possible to build 913 apartments out of the existing UN building, average size apartments. Office to residential conversions are often very difficult because deep square buildings leave apartments with dark interiors far away from any windows. The Secretariat building of the United Nations is uniquely suited for an alternate layout of studio apartments. The average studio apartment in New York, I'm informed, is 450 square feet. The Secretariat building is uniquely suited for studios because of its thin rectangular glass tower. This narrow profile ensures that even small studio units would get an abundance of natural light and direct views of either the East River or the Manhattan skyline. Assuming again 20% of the floor space allocated for common areas, it would now be possible to convert the UN building into 1,580 units of studio density, which is 450 square feet per unit. The major increase in New York's housing stock would come from the thousands of UN employees which no longer need to be located in or about Manhattan. They presumably, or most of them, would be going to some other location. This would greatly free up available housing. Well, if the United Nations is going to relocate, where should it go? A lot of options available. Obviously, it should go someplace where the cost would be less. One such place would be India, maybe New Delhi. India is the largest nation on earth in terms of population, and a location of the UN there would certainly be closer to a lot of the countries in Southeast Asia as well as many in Europe. The UN could buy or build a new headquarters in India at a fraction of what they could sell their headquarters in New York. And with lower living costs in India, the operation of the UN budget could be greatly reduced, much to the benefit of its members. So there's much to recommend a movement to something like India. A possible negative would still be the long commute distance from nations in South America to India. Another possible choice would be a move to Brazil and the capital there, Brasilia. Brazil is a developing nation, the largest in South America. It would be a closer commute for nations throughout South America and Africa. Construction costs in Brazil may be a little higher than they are in India, but still much lower than New York, as well as the cost of living. There are, of course, many other places in the world where the UN could relocate. But by selling its multi-billion-dollar property in New York and relocating to some other location less expensive, the UN could reap a big windfall that could be the basis for a sovereign wealth fund or an endowment fund to help finance UN activities. Relocating to a lower cost environment would ease financial burdens on member states and would also lower the cost of the annual budget of the UN. I have read reports where other members of the UN have already expressed an interest in relocation, so possibly this is an idea whose time has come. There would certainly be advantages to New York and the United States. New York would see an increase in tax revenues from the conversion of exempt property to tax-paying property, as well as increasing the supply of available housing. And the United States government would probably be relieved of a lot of difficulties in detecting spying and smuggling activities because of the current prohibitions against inspecting items that come in through diplomatic exemption as a result of membership in the United Nations. As a disclaimer, let me state I am not a tax expert on New York tax law, and neither am I an expert on New York construction. The information I have presented here I obtained from sources available online, but I think whoever does the calculations will come to a similar conclusion, that there would be a tremendous economic benefit to the members of the United Nations if the UN was relocated to a less expensive site.